What's up, everybody? This is Kyrie Thompson back once again, bringing you the Nonstop Sports Podcast, giving you some of my thoughts on the sports world, and I'd love for you to find me on social media and such so that you can share some of your nonstop sports thoughts with me. I'm always happy to chat. Hit up my Twitter handle at KDThompson5, Instagram at KyrieDT, and if you like the podcast, I'm throwing them on my YouTube channel for now. Search my name, Kyrie Thompson, or search for the Nonstop Sports Podcast, whichever you prefer. You can see some of my previous stuff. Well, for now, it's just one previous episode that I put up last week. And later, I'll be looking to add some of these files to SoundCloud, most likely. I already have a few files up on my SoundCloud profile with some audio from radio appearances and stuff like that I've done. But for now, I have to get a little bit more organized, so I'll be working on that sometime in the near future. Anyway, it's good to step back on here. I've been off for a couple of days because I started a new job as a sports data specialist, which for somebody who is really into research and kind of the advanced analytics of sports, it's really interesting to see how these advanced statistics put together and how they're made. You know, I'm working for a company right now, that's, kind of responsible for doing things like pitch tracks, in the MLB, tracking every single pitch, velocity, trying to even break things down, further to, kind of look at spin rates and, things of that nature. So, when you're turning on your live broadcast, that's the kind of stuff we're giving you. It's really interesting to be, kind of behind the scenes for that. At the same time, it's like, if there's ever anything close to sports overload, which, I haven't reached that point yet for sure, because I can be as much of a sports junkie as anybody. But it can get close. For example, I'm sitting there, it's part-time, so I'm there for almost 30 hours a week, and I try to knock it all out 3 straight days. So I'm sitting there staring at computer screens, I've got the setup, all around, 3 monitors at a given computer station. 2 of them are work monitors, and then the other one, is tuned into DirecTV, where you're sitting there and you can basically take your pick of any sport or any major sports channel you want to watch, ESPN, NFL Network, NBA, TV. For example, I sat up there and I watched, classic NBA Finals game from 2000. It was Game 1 of the 2000 NBA Finals with the Lakers and the Indiana Pacers, as a matter of fact. So it was one of, the Shaq and Kobe championships. One of the last few years Reggie Miller was playing as well. So sitting there working while also watching sports off to the side. So it's just, wow, sitting there for 10 straight hours with nothing but sports. In a way, it's kind of like a dream come true, and yet you're also just like, oh my goodness, my brain is about to seep out through my ears. But it's only week 1, and I'm sure I'll get more used to it. But one of the things that occurred while I was at this job, specifically on Tuesday, was this Kyrie Irving to the Boston Celtics trade. And we're sitting there, and, I also, in between bouts of working, check Twitter, right? Because that's, how you get all the news. That's just how it is. And you see the rumblings that this is actually starting to go down, that they're talking about this trade, and then later that they are expected to make it happen. They're talking about the final terms, and you're just like, wow, Kyrie Irving to the Celtics? That, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but that is the last trade I would have figured was going to happen when we first found out the news that Kyrie Irving was wanting to be traded from the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then finally, we're all sitting there just kind of, doing our jobs. We're not even necessarily doing basketball for the most part. I'm doing football games at this point, and other people are doing baseball. I don't think anybody is looking at basketball at this point as far as work goes. But then the moment this trade drops, we're all just like, wow. And then you think about the fact that the Cavaliers are going to get back Isaiah Thomas, who was one of the NBA's best players last year, for the Boston Celtics, was basically the reason why they, made it to the conference finals in the first place. Just an all-out warrior for the Celtics, despite, kind of his stature and being overlooked for all these years. But then you look at it and you're just like, these are kind of the same sort of player. So it's like, I don't know, like, what was the point of making this switch, if that's going to be, kind of the star player? But then, of course, the details start trickling in, and then you start thinking, wow, this is a very interesting trade, and it's kind of difficult for, us to decide who wins. But, of course, I'm going to try, because why not? Every trade is only as good as the debate about, who won it. So let's go ahead and talk about what the details are really quickly, so maybe you guys can kind of think about it and break it down, if you haven't already, of course, before I get to it and say, who I think won the trade. So the details. The Celtics get Kyrie Irving, and the Cavaliers get, in return, Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, which is a big deal as far as I see it, Ante Zizic, a backup center, and the Brooklyn Nets unprotected 2018 pick. That last part is huge, arguably the biggest part of the entire trade as far as I see it. But we'll get to that, okay? So a couple of questions. The way to kind of frame this is, first of all, do the Celtics actually look better for this trade, and can they beat the Cavs? And that part is going to lead into, obviously, deciding what the answer is to the next question. Who won the trade? Okay, is this trade going to put Boston over the top in their quest to get to an NBA Finals and finally get past the LeBron boogeyman that they've been fighting with, for the last, half decade or so? And then finally, a bigger question that, might get kind of lost in, obviously I was talking about Kyrie Irving and talking about the details of the trade. Can this trade, and specifically, can Kobe Altman, the Cleveland Cavaliers' new general manager, keep LeBron James in Cleveland after this coming season, amid all the rumors that he's as good as gone next year because he can't stand the ownership? Can Kobe Altman do something to change that? And could this trade, maybe, it's hard to say that it would now, but could it eventually have some bearing on whether or not LeBron James sticks around beyond the 2018 NBA season? So, first of all, let's get into the trade and what it does for the Boston Celtics. Specifically, what does Kyrie Irving now give the Boston Celtics, in terms of potentially making them an NBA title contender in the midst of everything else that they've done in this offseason and everything else that they have coming towards them? So, the answer to the first question, are the Celtics better? Yes, they are better. And it's not necessarily like it's a wide margin, like, Isaiah Thomas is, such a terrible player and Kyrie Irving, is going to give them stuff that they never ever had. I do think, though, that there is a gap between Kyrie Irving and Isaiah Thomas. And it's not necessarily, you know what, we got to be honest, it's not necessarily all about the numbers, okay? Because if we're talking about just numbers, Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving, especially offensively, are very similar players in terms of their productivity. So, for example, you look at regular season statistics for their careers. Kyrie Irving overall, 21.6 points a game. Isaiah Thomas, 19.1 points a game. So, okay, gap of 2 points. But it's not, a horribly significant gap in the end. Rebounds, Kyrie Irving, kind of beats, Isaiah Thomas by a rebound per game. Assists, they're almost identical, 5.6 for Kyrie Irving to 5.2 for Isaiah Thomas. Steals per game, both of them about 1.3 for Kyrie Irving, 1 for Isaiah Thomas. So little things like that, right? Field goal percentages. Kyrie Irving is a little bit better in terms of field goal percentage, 45.7 to 44.3 for Isaiah Thomas. 3-point percentage, 38.3 for Kyrie Irving, 36.7 for Isaiah Thomas. Free throw percentage, almost completely identical, both about 87%. Like, these kinds of things are, again, so it's very much a push. The best season that Isaiah Thomas had, is certainly, going to be better than the best one that Kyrie Irving's had as far as points, because that was last year. Isaiah Thomas averaged, almost 29 points a game. Kyrie Irving's best season also last season was, 25.2. Though you're thinking that maybe, if he goes to a team that doesn't have LeBron James on it, maybe he scores more, which is entirely possible. But the point I'm trying to make here is if you're looking in terms of, obvious statistical value, for the most part, you're going to find that Kyrie Irving and Isaiah Thomas are very similar players. So, people then will say, why is it that you think that the Boston Celtics are better? Kyrie Irving is a more special player than Isaiah Thomas. And he's also just physically bigger. And, he's going to be able to do more things from a physical standpoint that Isaiah Thomas can do. Because, as great as Isaiah Thomas is and as much as he gives you and as much heart as he gives you on the basketball court, it's obvious. Isaiah Thomas is only 5'9". So that's just flat out going to make it really hard for him to physically defend point guards that are generally going to be bigger than him. That's just kind of the fact of the matter. In particular, this is just looking at last season, right? Looking at some stats here, in the playoffs, people really took advantage of this. So offensive ratings, so Kyrie Irving was, better in the playoffs offensively, than Isaiah Thomas was. But the gap is particularly bigger in terms of value over their replacement player. So Kyrie Irving had, like a 0.5, value over replacement player in the playoffs, whereas Isaiah Thomas had a 0.2, because the defensive difference was so big between, Isaiah Thomas, between Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving relatively. And then when you look at their cumulative stats, just for their entire careers, it's a very similar thing. Isaiah Thomas continues to have, kind of a worse defensive rating than Kyrie Irving does, despite, for the career part, having a better offensive rating than Kyrie Irving does. So, you're always hoping with both players, right? You're always hoping that their offensive ability outweighs their defense, their defensive liability. The problem is that that's always going to be a little bit higher with Isaiah Thomas because he's just physically can't handle some of these assignments, whereas when Kyrie Irving feels like it, he can be a good, a solid defensive back. I don't want to say good, but he can be all right as a defender. You look at, the two NBA finals in particular, the first two that, the Cleveland Cavaliers played against the Golden State Warriors. And the first one obviously being before Kyrie Irving got shelved for the rest of the final with that broken kneecap. He was making plays on Steph Curry. He's blocking Steph's shot. He's bothering him and hounding him. And, in that second NBA Finals in particular, again, when he felt like doing it, he could guard Steph Curry. He could chase him around. He could make things more difficult for him when he felt like it. And that's the thing. He has at least the potential of doing that. Whereas Isaiah Thomas can run around and be scrappy as much as you want, but he's 5'9". So in the end, even somebody like Steph Curry, again, like people forget, like Steph Curry's 6'3", Kyrie Irving's 6'3", because they're out there with a bunch of other monsters. They're looking at Isaiah Thomas like, yeah, well, I can kind of just shoot over you and do whatever I want. And they're not even that big. It's just that Isaiah Thomas is such a small player. So it's not necessarily that Kyrie Irving is going to be some great defensive presence for the Boston Celtics. It's that he gives them the potential, perhaps, to do a little bit more, and maybe not expect as much liability as you might if you had Isaiah Thomas. Also, you just talk about Kyrie Irving being the kind of special basketball player that he is, and his ability to score and his ability to handle the basketball and create his own shot. Aside from Kevin Durant, I would say that Kyrie Irving is the most unguardable player in the NBA. There is not one single person, maybe you could try, Kawhi Leonard. I'd be really interesting to see that. But there might not be one player in the NBA that can guard this man one-on-one. and Klay Thompson did an outstanding job for the first couple games of those finals. And then finally, kind of there came a point where the floodgates just opened and Kyrie Irving was too much. If you put that kind of player on Boston with some of the firepower that they now have and some of that which is still developing, right? So you got Gordon Hayward, and you can sleep on Gordon Hayward as much as you want, but that man is a really good basketball player, okay? Do not sleep on Gordon Hayward. He's good. Been hearing people kind of talk about like, oh yeah, Gordon Hayward, okay, maybe Gordon Hayward doesn't, make you a finals contender, by himself, like if he's your best player, and we saw that with Utah, but, I think that with Utah, there were other issues that they just didn't really have enough around him, aside from like him and Rudy Gobert. But, Gordon Hayward as a piece that you can add alongside Kyrie Irving, that's some solid stuff. And then you think about Jaylen Brown, that boy is coming. And people could talk about, oh yeah, he's just putting up a lot of these big numbers, playing against people in summer league. It's like, no. You watch the first couple games of that, series that they had against the Cavaliers. No, Jaylen Brown, that's a good player. And that's why you can get rid of a guy like Jay Crowder, because you got Jaylen Brown on the rise, on the come up. And then you have, Jason Tatum, whom they just drafted. Now, it's not like he's necessarily going to come in and, maybe be the rookie of the year, though I think he has that potential. And he's not the most spectacular athlete or the most, outstanding defender, but boy, he's got some natural scoring ability. So you put these guys on the court and you let them grow together for the, next couple of years at least, because Kyrie Irving still has a couple of years left on that deal. You don't have to, if things go well, you might be having Kyrie Irving in Boston for a while if he chooses to re-sign there, because apparently he's very happy about this move. So, Boston has gotten better. Now the question then becomes, and I'm probably going to have a bit of a shorter answer to this one, is it enough to beat LeBron? Still no. And maybe, it's going to come, in the next couple of years as LeBron slowly but surely, is going to diminish as a player, because it's got to happen at some point. It just does, because that's the way of things. Father Time is undefeated. But if we're still talking about LeBron James, even just from last year, if he puts up numbers like that, and again, if he comes into the playoffs just going scorched earth on people, so maybe it wasn't like that again in the Boston series, because there's talk about he was sick or hurt or whatever, kind of in the middle of that series. But if you're talking about the LeBron James that can still, after an entire season, go and throw down a 32-point triple-double on the Golden State Warriors, if you're talking about that LeBron, no, you're still not beating that guy. And then you talk about the fact that, again, so Isaiah Thomas is going to, I think, play a little bit better with LeBron James perhaps than Kyrie Irving did at certain points, because I think he's not going to take some of the shots, and kind of go maverick the way Kyrie Irving did. I think that Isaiah Thomas will play a little bit more, kind of like alongside LeBron James and accept some of the opportunities that LeBron, will kind of give to him, and accept them gladly, because Isaiah Thomas can shoot and score as well. So kind of getting a little bit more of that pressure off him, where he's not just having to go barreling into people in the fourth quarter, and sacrificing his body all the time. That could work out for him. And then you talk about the fact that they got Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder, gives you a guy that can play defense in a way that was not really on the Cavaliers, last year. He's known as, a rugged, wing defender. He will go in there and do the dirty work for you, and he can hit the three as well. And that's the kind of guy that the Cavaliers just didn't really have. Okay, like Iman Shumpert, you expect him to maybe be able to be that guy, except that Iman Shumpert was really bad. And so that didn't work out. But Jay Crowder gives you that guy. And boy, do the Cavs need that. They need somebody who can play some defense. And so you've now gotten that. And you still have LeBron, and you still have a point guard that can score. Now, the rest of it, as a team, the Cavaliers are fairly vulnerable. I think if it were, kind of another star like a Paul George or something like that, then yeah, I would absolutely give the Celtics the edge here. But because it's LeBron James, and until further notice, he's the man, he's the big boss here, I'm still thinking you can't say the Celtics have put themselves, in the NBA Finals yet, because the man's too good still. And again, till further notice, that's what I'm going with. So better, but still not enough to me. So again, looking at who won this trade, if we're going to move on to the next question here, who won the trade between these two teams? I'm going to have to say the Cavaliers, not necessarily by much, but I think that Cleveland ultimately pulled off a deal that is going to be really important both in the immediate future in terms of this next season, but also what happens after 2018. So on one hand, if you're measuring this solely in terms of Kyrie Irving versus Isaiah Thomas, then yeah, I would say the Celtics won the trade, because you got a guy who, I think is better than Isaiah Thomas, and he's 3 years younger without the health concerns. Because you're thinking about, Isaiah Thomas has, these hip struggles, with hip injuries and stuff like that. He went through a lot last year in terms of, just kind of getting beat up in the playoffs, and obviously the personal stuff notwithstanding. But, also I heard there's shoulder issues and things like that. So Isaiah Thomas is, 28, so he's not old, right? So you think he's still entering his prime, and he's still got plenty of good years ahead of him, but he might not be that same player, that he was last year, maybe just because of health. And then Kyrie Irving is 25 years old. 25 years old. And, he hasn't necessarily entered his prime yet. And that's crazy when you think about some of the upside and the ability that he already has. So if you're just matching that up, then sure, the Celtics won the trade. But you throw in Jay Crowder in particular and what he gives you from a sorely needed aspect for the Cavaliers, their inability to stop anybody. Now, again, of course, getting Jay Crowder doesn't mean that Kevin Durant is not going to score 35, 36 points a game on you in the NBA Finals necessarily. He'll make it. You would make it harder for him in this case, but like if we're talking about a Finals rematch. But in the end, it's not like he by himself is just going to be the magic, Kevin Durant stopper or, a magical stopper for, whatever wing player they go up against. But it is a solid addition, for something that they needed. Plus, again, he's a guy that, LeBron James can penetrate and kick to Jay Crowder in the corner, and Jay Crowder can hit threes. That is so valuable when you have LeBron James. Just the ability to have guys that can hit shots. You put him on the court, as, a small forward or, ish kind of guy, and put LeBron James, guarding a 4 or something, J.R. Smith at the 2. You can have some real solid lineups out there, in terms of, what you can do, kind of from a defensive standpoint and putting shooters on the floor. There's a lot of good stuff that you can do. And then the kicker is going to be that Brooklyn pick. Now, when looking at, what that means for, the future, and again, this will get into a little bit, in kind of answering the next question. The Cleveland Cavaliers really need to, be able to restock some talent in the draft. And obviously they weren't really able to do that this year because they didn't have a single pick. And to recap why that was, the Cleveland Cavaliers traded away their 2017 first-round draft pick to Portland as part of a multi-team deal to get Kyle Korver from Atlanta over to Cleveland. And, obviously, they wanted Kyle Korver to give them 3-point shooting. And, that was a very win now kind of move. And so Portland ended up using that pick, the 26th pick overall, to draft Caleb Swanigan from Purdue, which, hey, that would have been nice. But, in the end, that's the cost of doing business. And then their second round pick in 2017 went to Boston as part of a 5-player deal. So this was back in 2014. So this deal involved, trading away Keith Bogans. And so that one actually ended up going the 56th overall pick in this year's draft. So basically, the Cavaliers traded away their draft picks, for a shot to win now. Well, particularly their first round pick this year. At the same time, they did get back a 2018 pick in the first round in that Portland deal, that brought Korver to the Cavaliers. So they did get a 2018 recouped, and then they got this pick coming up, from the Brooklyn Nets, an unprotected pick. Now, of course, that could be a big deal because, assuming that the Brooklyn Nets are, maybe they won't be as bad as they were last year. There's always that possibility. But assuming that the Brooklyn Nets are going to be bad again, then that leaves you with another possible lottery pick here, in addition to the first round that you already have coming up for 2018. So the Cavaliers are putting themselves in a nice position, after, these last couple of years of really aiming for a title, and kind of focusing on the now, with LeBron James' prime, kind of running out. Maximizing their chances to win a title every single year rather than looking at the future. So that actually kind of, gives them a chance to reload a little bit with some of these veterans that they've been relying on, like Richard Jefferson, Channing Frye, right, kind of things like that, with them going out the door. When those guys, are no longer able to contribute, and when it's time to rely on new blood, they're going to have that opportunity to bring it in. So it works out really nicely for the Cavs, to make that trade. And so from that standpoint, both in the immediate future, for example, what Jay Crowder gives you, and, perhaps Zizic as well, if he's able to become a solid backup, because that's a big problem, not having anybody aside from Tristan Thompson that you can put on the floor and have them not screw everything up, as far as having bigs out there. So maybe he gives you, kind of a Timofey Mozgov thing, who was very solid for them, in those 2 years that he came over, with the Cavaliers. He was a very good player for them, in terms of being a backup and an occasional starter. He ended up starting in the NBA Finals. So maybe, having a backup big is helpful. But I think that for sure that pick swings the trade because how much the Boston Celtics love their assets, and they love the ability, to stockpile these young players. I mean, in the end, that's how they have, basically rebuilt their franchise in such a short time, is being able to stockpile all this young talent and get guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and being able to, they swung that trade with the Sixers for Markelle Fultz, and they got more assets, right? Because they were going to have the number 1 pick. Like, it's an embarrassment of riches for them. And for them to be able to give that up, to the Cavaliers, and the Cavaliers are going to be able to use it the way that they're going to, and yet they're still at the top of the Eastern Conference right now, it's a pretty sweet deal for the Cavs. And the other reason why it's a really nice deal for the Cavaliers is because of the limbo that they're in regarding LeBron James. Because we have no clue what exactly is going to happen with LeBron James next year. Everybody is kind of assuming at this point that he's gone because he can't stand Dan Gilbert, because of the way that Dan Gilbert just kind of allowed Dave Griffin, a guy who helped bring them their first championship, in franchise history, just kind of callously lets him walk out the door because of creative differences. I don't really have an answer for you there, but, the fact that, obviously the relationship between, Dan Gilbert and LeBron James has been strained for a while for, obvious reasons. We all know the story by now. That hilarious letter that was sent when LeBron James, first left Cleveland. This did not help. Dave Griffin leaving the Cavaliers the way that he did, just kind of left as a lame duck GM, on the cusp of perhaps negotiating a Jimmy Butler trade to the Cavaliers. And then Dan Gilbert's like, we mutually agreed to split. What? Right before the draft? Like, okay, so I mean that is another, kind of ridiculous thing. But looking at, what Kobe Altman has done in swinging this trade and other things, like Kobe Altman has been aggressive in his desire to make this team better, potentially in order to keep LeBron James around for a little while. For example, rumors, and kind of stories started coming out that Altman called the Golden State Warriors about trading Kyrie Irving straight up for Klay Thompson. And, the Golden State Warriors weren't buying it because they really like Klay Thompson, and he's a very good player for them. But again, this is the kind of stuff that Kobe Altman is trying to do in an effort to keep this team at a championship level. He's turning over all the rocks, and he's not, leaving any of them unturned. And one wonders that if he continues to do this and he continues making moves that show LeBron James that he's committed to bringing another championship here, will it be enough to convince LeBron James to stay in Cleveland, despite his disdain for Dan Gilbert? We have no idea how that's going to shake out. In the end, LeBron's silence in this matter has been deafening, in terms of, Kyrie Irving, saying he wanted to be traded and then not being traded for kind of such a long time. That maybe the fact that LeBron James hasn't been clear about his intentions might have been one of the reasons why Kyrie Irving didn't want to stay in Cleveland in the first place. Because, okay, so there's the part about him, not wanting to, be the second fiddle, and he wants to be his own guy and, whatnot, right? Well, here's the thing. If LeBron James had decided to walk, he would have gotten that opportunity probably. Well, not probably. He would have gotten that opportunity. If LeBron James decided he was going to up and leave for LA, leave to the Clippers, or the Lakers or whatever that everybody is speculating, then Kyrie Irving has his team. The thing is, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be the last guy. He doesn't want to be, the guy on a terrible team. I think that has been, kind of the lone exception on his destination chart, where he would have been the lone guy on a bad team, would have been the New York Knicks. But that's different because that's home for him. The East Coast, like the New Jersey, New York area, that's home for Kyrie Irving. So that doesn't necessarily compute in the same way that, him saying he wanted to go to the Minnesota Timberwolves or the San Antonio Spurs does. Those are, I want to be the guy, the main scorer or whatever, on a winner. Or, maybe I just don't want to play with LeBron James. Otherwise, him not wanting to stay with the Cavaliers, even if LeBron was going to leave anyway, he doesn't want to be the last guy dancing at this party, once it goes sour. So, I think that it's telling, this effect that LeBron James is having on, Kyrie Irving, on those trade discussions, and just kind of on the league, right? Everybody's speculating what his next move is going to be. And it's making the Cavaliers uncomfortable, I'm sure, because, who is going to want to sign with the Cleveland Cavaliers for any extended period of time, if they expect to, win a championship, if LeBron James is going to leave, and basically what is the future going to look like if LeBron leaves and your team is bad? So, again, that's why this trade is a big deal, because then you are kind of cushioning the blow. So if you're going to rebuild, you at least get to rebuild right off the bat with a couple of first round picks. And then maybe, you can swing something where you can get a second rounder in there as well if you want one. But otherwise, you're cool with the 2 first round picks. Why not? And then, they're going to need to get something, though, in the future because, again, I think in 2019, they're without a first-round pick. So, again, it's like you're kind of thinking ahead to, number one, if LeBron isn't even around, and number two, eventually LeBron James is, going to be past his prime. That will eventually happen at some point, right? He's not just going to be dropping triple doubles on everybody at age 37, is he? Though if one guy was going to do it, it would be LeBron James. But anyway, the thought that Kobe Altman, making these moves, and really just putting forth this kind of strong effort, I think that maybe this could be the last ditch effort, and it could have some merit as to can LeBron James be kept in Cleveland? Will he be able to get, he was able to get past Dan Gilbert in the first place, right? Coming back, to Cleveland and, being able to kind of, put his team together and, make these last three runs to the NBA finals. And, Dave Griffin leaving, and perhaps even, if you look at this, right, Dave Griffin, being, kind of sent away by Dan Gilbert, probably, is going to rub people, like, LeBron James, the guy in the franchise, the only reason why you're even relevant, as far as NBA championships, is going to rub them the wrong way because if I have a good GM, or like we have a good GM, and you're just going to let him go because you never keep GMs because you can't agree with anybody or whatever reason, like, Dan Gilbert didn't win that championship, Dan, like you could make the argument, that basically it was won, kind of in spite of Dan Gilbert, and it's always been won in spite of Dan Gilbert and his, just acerbic personality and things like that. But again, maybe you're looking at this if you're LeBron James is saying like, okay, Kobe Altman's, what if he does a good job? No, that means that Dan Gilbert's going to get rid of him too. Who knows? But perhaps, at kind of the tail end of his prime, the ability to kind of, be in this place and continue competing for championships with a young GM, rookie GM, who is determined to give you what you want and determined to get you where you want to go. I think that perhaps more so than a couple of weeks ago when, it was kind of just assured that LeBron James was as good as gone to everybody, I think LeBron James is going to evaluate this. I don't think his mind is made up. And again, who knows? I'm not LeBron James, so I'm not in his head. I don't know what he thinks. But I'm just saying, I don't necessarily think that it's over yet. I think that there's a possibility that Kobe Altman could salvage this thing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if he does, that would be one of the most like kind of unsung hero type things I've ever heard of. If he's able to kind of save the Cleveland Cavaliers from the brink of destruction that, Dan Gilbert has clearly been leading it down. So there's going to be a lot of intrigue coming up, in this next summer about what's going to happen with LeBron James. It's going to be a frenzy. And personally, I can't wait for it because, basically here's how it is, right? The NBA offseason was crazy this past year, but if you want to make it crazier, always throw in LeBron James. Anyway, that's all the time we've got for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out the Nonstop Sports Podcast. Once again, I'm Kyrie Thompson. You can check me out on Twitter at KDThompson5, Instagram at KyrieDT, and check out the YouTube channel where I've got these videos posted. I'm going to keep on trying to deliver one of these once a week. It shouldn't be too hard because the sports is a nonstop universe, and so there's always something to talk about. Thank you very much, and have a great one, you guys. La